Hi everyone, and welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Kira. I'm the Digital Events Manager at Connecting Up and TechSnoop New Zealand. Connecting Up and TechSnoop New Zealand are part of the Info Exchange Group, a non-for-profit social enterprise that tackles the biggest social challenges through the smart and creative use of technology. For those of you who haven't attended a webinar session with us before, Connecting Up and TechSnoop New Zealand facilitate an annual trailing calendar of online webinars, workshops, boot camps, and webcons to help the social sector upskill in all things digital. Check out our training and education menu on our website for more events coming up online. Some housekeeping first for today. All your lines are muted, so if you have any technical issues, please type your question into the questions box on the webinar panel and I'll be able to assist you. If you have any questions during the session, please also type in these questions box and Stephen will answer them in a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. We really encourage you to ask as many questions as you think throughout the session to make this as dynamic and interactive a session as possible. Remember, no question is too silly, but also note your comments and questions will not appear to the entire group. If you're on a Wi-Fi connection and have multiple programs open, this can sometimes affect the quality of the audio and video of your webinar. If possible, please close all your programs to help you have the best experience today. Note that this webinar is also being recorded, and a link to the recording and the slides will be sent to you as soon as we can after the webinar ends. But enough about that. I'm excited to welcome today to Finding the Perfect CRM with Stephen Mally. And before we start, I'd also like to remind you that there's a short survey at the end of the webinar, and if you could take the time to complete this, we'd really appreciate it. Thanks for attending today, and I'll hand you over to Stephen.
Thank you. Good morning or good afternoon, depending upon where you're joining us from. I just want to say a quick thank you at the outset for sharing this next hour with us. As she said, we do invite your questions, so put them in the chat window, and I'm going to save enough time at the end of the webinar to try to address all of your questions appropriately. If for some reason we don't get through all the questions, I will answer them in an email and we can send that out with the follow-up materials. So just a quick introduction of myself. My background is as a fundraiser in North America, as you can tell by my accent. I was a fundraiser for, well, I've been a fundraiser, I shouldn't say was, I've been a fundraiser for over 35 years in North America, mostly in the healthcare sector. So I've worked for large medical research centers in North America, in largely the Boston area. I started this company about 9 years ago called FundraisingForce. And the reason that I started the company is I felt very strongly that there weren't a lot of fundraisers who also knew technology. So we offer two, I guess, branches of service. The first is fundraising strategy and consulting. And then the second branch of service, or second arm of service, is all about technology. So we help charities find the perfect, if you will, technology set for their organization. And we also project manage a lot of technology projects throughout the course of the year. In terms of our CRM searches, I'm going to talk today about that process, and that happens to be a product that we offer the sector, but there are lots of consultants out there that do this type of service. I'm just going to offer you the best practices in terms of that service. So here's what I hope to cover today. I'm going to give you an overview of all the products in the market, and there are lots and lots of products out there. I'm going to talk about 6 common misconceptions that charitable organizations typically have when they go into a process like this. I'll talk about who in your organization to involve in your search for the right technology set. I'm going to offer you a 10-point CRM search process, and I think each of these 10 points are really, really vital. And I'm also going to talk about what to do when you go to implement your CRM. That's a whole nother webinar, but I'll touch on it today. And then at the end, I'll give you a bit of a summary of all the key takeaways. So in terms of the products in this market, there are 2 types of platforms that you could obtain. The first is a fundraising platform, and the second is a CRM platform, and they're very different. First and foremost, like it says, fundraising platform really only focuses on fundraising functionality, and that's fine, that's necessary for each of our organizations, but a CRM platform does a whole lot more. So if your organization needs to implement a CRM organization-wide, you want to choose a CRM platform. If your organization is only focused on tracking your fundraising functionality, then you want to choose a fundraising platform. It's as easy as that. If your organization thinks, we're going to start with just fundraising, but eventually we're going to bring programs and services and advocacy or what have you on, then I think you probably want to choose a CRM platform to start with and grow into it. Now let's look at the products in each of those spaces. The first space, the fundraising platform space. There is IMIS, which is a product that's put out by Advanced Solutions International, or ASI. Vega, a product out of New Zealand, but growing here in Australia. Thank You. And then, of course, there's the Blackbaud products, eTapestry, Razor's Edge, and Blackbaud CRM. On the CRM side, it's less crowded. There's Clarity, Salesforce, and Microsoft Dynamics. So there's a real distinction in the market. I'll tell you, when I moved to Australia 15 years ago, there were really only 3 players, IMIS, Thank You, and Razor's Edge. And today, gladly, the market's become more crowded, so each organization has a lot of choice to make. Some organizations we work with say we only want to look at suppliers that deal with product A, or we only want to look at product B. And I oftentimes encourage them to look across the market because choice is good. Choice offers us greater functionality, competitiveness, and of course, buying power, and that's what we want. So now I'm going to turn to those misconceptions, and these are oftentimes things that people will say or think when they go into a process, and I strongly discourage them. The first is that I've got to buy quickly. This is a really important decision that you're going to make. It might be the biggest investment for some organizations, and therefore take your time. You are driving the bus throughout this process. You're really driving the bus to the point that you sign the contract. So take your time and make sure that you do your due diligence. Second, I've got to have it all and I need it all on day one. You don't. You don't need to roll everything out at once. You can roll things out in phases. And in fact, that's probably the best approach. It's best from a change management perspective. And it's also best for adoption, learning, and that sort of stuff. So the third misconception, product A is the only one available. Not true anymore. We've got choice in this market, as I've just pointed out. The fourth, product B is the best available. Is it the best for your organization? In a bit, I'll talk about gathering your functional requirements, which is probably the most important first step that you can take. And the best product is the best product suitable to meet your functional requirements. It must be good. Organization X uses it. Well, just because organization X uses product A doesn't mean that product A is the best suited for your organization. Again, it's about your individual organization's functional requirements. Product C will work out of the box. None of these products work out of the box anymore. It used to be years ago, and I'm going to date myself, we would purchase software, we would load a CD-ROM into a server, and that product would be loaded on various workstations, and we'd start to train the team and use it. That was out of the box technology. Yes, some of these CRMs come pre-configured or configured to a certain stage, but really what you want is a configurable solution that you can shape around your business processes. You don't want anything that's out of the box, and really none of these products are truly out of the box anymore. The last one is, I've used product D before, therefore it's my favorite. Okay, great. You used it at another organization. It worked well for you there, but is it the best suited solution for the organization where you work at present? So now I'm going to turn to who to involve in your organization. I'll shorten this slide right at the get-go and say involve everybody, but that's sometimes not really possible. So let's talk about who to involve. You need to involve a cross-section of your staff, particularly if you are going to adopt an organization-wide CRM. You want to make sure that you get buy-in from a good cross-section of your staff. So don't just have yourself and maybe the IT manager look at these solutions. Really gather requirements from across the business, or at least across the part of the business that's going to use the technology. And then after you do that, make sure that you're engaging others across the business and you're bringing them along on the journey. Also include varying levels of staff. It's not just the manager of or the director of that you want to involve in this process. Instead, you want to involve staff of varying levels. This is an opportunity to engage people who otherwise wouldn't be involved in a decision of such magnitude. You want to involve leadership. You absolutely need leadership's buy-in, and you want executive buy-in from the get-go. You don't want to exclude them or bring them in at the very end. You want to bring them along on the journey, just like the staff of all levels. You definitely want to involve the finance committee of your board because they hold the purse strings, right? So you want to make sure that what you're ultimately going to propose in the end will be endorsed by the finance committee and other board members. Okay, now I'm going to turn to that 10-point process. I'm going to first tell you what the 10 points are, and I'm just going to go through them very quickly, and then I'm going to focus on each and every one. So you don't have to retain this. You don't have to quickly write down notes. Remember, this is recorded. Plus, I'm going to focus on each one individually through the balance of the webinar. The first one is functional requirements gathering. I said that this was an important first step, and I'll talk about it in detail and how to do it. Number 2, market research. Number 3, invitations to the market. Number 4, request for proposals, RFP. 5, response meetings. 6, proposals. 7, demonstrations. 8, negotiations. 9, selection. And 10, a business plan for your board. Okay, again, I'm going to go through each one of these in detail. As I do it, ask questions in the chat window, challenge me. I want to hear from you because at the end we'll have a bit of a conversation. Okay, first, requirements gathering. Let's talk about this process. So here in requirements gathering, we really need to understand our organization internally. We think we might understand the business. Maybe you've been there 15 years and you say, I know what we're looking for. It's important that you document each and every functional requirement that you're ultimately going to ask a supplier to configure in the chosen software. Leading up to that, each and every functional requirement is going to have to be ultimately examined in the software. You want to make sure that these important requirements can be delivered in the software that you're going to choose. And in doing so, we've got to document these on individual lines in a functional requirements document. We need to be able to articulate these to the suppliers. We need to ultimately, as I said, document those in individual lines. In a minute, I'm going to put up a screenshot of what my template looks like. And there's a couple of examples in that template just to guide you. You need to make sure that you understand your business processes. If you are like 90 to 95% of the charitable organizations in Asia Pac, you don't have business processes documented. That's a must do, but perhaps not right now because that will overwhelm you. So this is an opportunity for you to say, okay, I need to book a donation. Within the donation, I need to be able to book a credit card, a check, BPay, whatever it might be, right? All of those different components will all be individual lines on your functional requirements document. If that stuff is up in your head and the heads and minds of your colleagues, you got to get that down onto paper to articulate that to the suppliers. You also want to understand what data are we going to have to migrate. Is all of that data in our existing CRM, or is it in 30 different spreadsheets? Most organizations don't have their data in a single location. So you want to take a bit of an inventory of where that data exists to be able to understand what data is going to be migrated into the new CRM and what are we going to leave behind. This is a screenshot of just a couple of rows of my functional requirements template that I use for our customers at FundraisingForce. And you can see that there's a couple of requirements on there for high value fundraising. First is a native ability to track moves management in the CRM, and the second is a dedicated space to track financial details or publicly available financial holdings of a given prospect. You'll notice that I've documented that both of these are essential. They're not desired or wanted, they're essential, and they're going to be in phase one. Perhaps you'll have requirements that are just desired, so they're not absolute musts. And maybe you'll have requirements that are in future phases. So it's important to let them know what exactly are they quoting on and what needs to be rolled out now versus in the future. You'll notice that I give suppliers 4 choices. 1, this requirement can be met with configuration. 2, this is a customization. 3, this is a third-party app that will deliver on this requirement. Or 4, we can't meet this requirement at all. All the supplier can do when we send this out to market is put a tick under one of those categories, and only one tick. They can't give us notes about it. They can't resort the spreadsheet. They can't give us 2 choices. They can only give us 1. And that's so that we can go through and evaluate one supplier against another. If they want to give us a whole story about it, they put that in their proposal response, and they reference the requirement number that is in the far most left column. So that's our template. You might put it in a different format, but it's just important that you document these functional requirements. Number 2, market research. So what do I mean by this? It's important for us to understand the available products out there in the market. I put some logos up on an earlier slide. Not every product is going to be suitable for your organization. So once you document those functional requirements, you want to say, okay, now out there in the market, who should we take a look at? And it might be 2 or 3 products, 3 or 4 products, whatever it becomes. Then within those products, there are multiple suppliers that either sell or deliver those products. So you're not limited to just a product. There might be choice within that product of different suppliers that will actually work with you to implement. And that's a great thing because, again, choice implies competition, which helps us with pricing, which is important for our sector. Second, under this category, we need to decide whether or not we want to just look at fundraising solutions or if we're interested in those wider CRM platforms. And more customers in this market are going from a fundraising platform to a CRM platform. The reason is that they want to, again, broaden it and perhaps implement it organization-wide, or in the future they might, so they're thinking ahead, and that's a great thing. You want to conduct some initial research. You don't need to do extensive research, but enough to know what's out there in the market. Number 3, request for proposals. So this is the second document that you're going to write. You're going to do that functional requirements document and then write the RFP. In the RFP, you're going to want to match certain things back to your functional requirements. You're going to expand on them. So maybe it's data migration. Maybe it's project methodology. Maybe it's project timeline. Maybe it's about the relationship that you seek in a supplier. I don't know what it is, but there'll be things that you want to ask the supplier that requires them to give an answer far beyond a tick box. And so therefore we issue an RFP with various categories that are important for our customer. And this RFP document might be 30, 40 pages long. I don't know how long it is, but at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you ask all of those questions that you want them to answer and respond in a narrative format. You want to ask for elaboration on your fundraising requirements. So maybe there's something about integrations that you want them to expand on. Maybe something about the data migration that you want them to expand on. At the end of the day, it can be any of those. It won't be all of them, but there might be a few key ones that you want to pull out and ask them to elaborate on. Here is a screenshot of table of contents of a RFP from back in 2020. And this is similar to our ongoing template that we issue and use for our projects. And you can see here that we're asking them to expand on their firm background, their implementation team and methodology, how they deal with customer service versus customer support, how their product compares to others in the market, et cetera, et cetera. So there are about 15 items in there that we have asked them to elaborate on that they couldn't do in that functional requirements document. You'll notice that pricing is item 15. They hate to answer that question, but they must. We want to know what they're initially quoting this project. We're not going to hold them to it, but at the end of the day, that is a comparison factor, and it's an important one in our market because money does not grow on trees. All right, number 4, invitations. So you're going to issue 2 invitations. The first one is to those in the market that you believe you want to send your packet to, and you're going to ask them in that invite letter to sign your NDA or your confidentiality agreement. You're also going to describe what your process is, what your timeline is. You're inviting them to the table, but you're saying to them that they must sign your NDA in order to be opted into the process. If they don't sign your NDA, then they're indicating that they're not interested. And that's okay. It's not a required thing, right? You're inviting them. You're inviting them to the party. And so you want to set some boundaries in this document as well. If there's a single point of contact, identify who that is so that they're not calling everybody in your organization. In fact, identify that single point of contact up front and tell them that they can't contact anybody but that person. For the processes that we run, that's me. And we do that because oftentimes suppliers will try to take members of the team to lunch or dinner or out for drinks or offer gifts and that sort of stuff and try to influence the process. And we want to keep it objective and neat and clean. At the end of the day, for the processes that we run at FundraisingForce, we don't care what solution you choose or which supplier you end up working with. At the end of the day, we just want you to choose the best solution for you and the best fit for your organization. And the same should be true if you run the process. Set those boundaries up front. All right, I mentioned there's a second invitation, and I should tell you about that before I go on to response meetings. The second invitation is an invite to actually respond to the process. So there's 2 invite letters, and that's the second one, and I've got templates for both of those as well. All right, response meetings, what are those? You've sent the RFP packet out to the market, and now you want to have a meeting with the suppliers. These meetings are traditionally optional meetings. You've got 2 choices though. They can either be one-on-one. So if you invite, let's imagine you invite 5 or 6 suppliers, you're going to have 6 1 to 2 hour meetings if you're going to do them one-on-one. or you can do them with everybody in one room at one time. I'm going to talk to you about the pros and cons of each of those. The pro or the positive of doing the one-on-one is that it's a blind process. So, Salesforce doesn't know that Blackbaud and Microsoft Dynamics are included. And even within those spaces, the individual partners that implement Salesforce or Microsoft Dynamics or another product don't know who's involved in the process. That helps you with negotiations at the end because they don't know who they're up against, and that's a good thing. A group process, the positive is you don't have to have all those individual meetings. Instead, everybody hears everything at once from you, and everybody hears everybody else's questions and the answers that you give those questions. So everybody gets the same information all at once. The negative is it's not a blind process, it's very exposed, and therefore everyone knows who's involved and would likely know their strengths and their weaknesses as well. Everything in life has a positive and a negative. You'll choose what's right for you. We've done both processes for organizations, whether it's a university, a school, a museum, a hospital, environmental group, you name them. I prefer the one-on-one and keeping the process blind until the very end because I think the organization benefits greater than time savings on my part doing group meetings, but you'll decide the best fit for your organization. Again, you're going to answer questions. Ultimately, no matter which process you choose, you want to respect the supplier's time. They're investing a lot of time, as are you, in this process, and you want to be very respectful of that supplier's time because they've got lots of these processes going on at the same time. All right, number 6, proposals. So the suppliers will go away from those info sessions and they're going to craft a proposal. And they're also going to respond to your functional requirements. They're going to return back to you 2 documents, a proposal and your original functional requirements document with the tick boxes. The proposals will be lengthy. And remember, if you invite 5 or 6 suppliers to the process, you could get 5 or 6 proposals back. There's no guarantee. Sometimes people drop out for whatever reason during the process, but you could get 5 or 6 back, and so it's going to take time to review those. Who reviews them? I recommend that you form a selection panel and that selection committee or panel is an odd number of people, just in case you've got a split decision. It's like the US Supreme Court. Ultimately, you'll get a decision. And I would charge that selection panel with making a recommendation, not a selection, but a recommendation to the executive sponsor and leadership. The reason that I would phrase it that way, most of the time leadership is going to endorse the decision made by this panel, but at the end of the day, you want them to know that there are others who will be examining the process you've gone through, the due diligence, and ultimately the recommendation that they have made. You want to make sure that you accept all proposals on the same day at the deadline. I usually say 5 o'clock on X date. I don't extend that deadline. Some suppliers will ask for an extension. Don't extend it because otherwise it's not fair to those that do the work on time. You want to acknowledge receipt of every single proposal. Remember, this is about respect and respecting the supplier's time. So you want to let them know that you've received it on time and it will be put before the selection panel. You want to create your first evaluation form and you're going to evaluate the proposals against one another. I typically list the key sections of the RFP and a 1 to 5 scale. This is not the normal comfort zone for your selection panel. So you're going to want to coach them and make sure that they do the evaluating, that they understand what their task is. The great thing is everybody brings different perspectives to the table. You want them to do this in isolation. You don't want them to do this in a group. They will be able to discuss it as a group for the first time when you have your selection meeting. But at the end of the day, you want this first exercise to be individual think and individual evaluations. Number 7, demonstrations. So out of that selection meeting, you're going to invite some of those suppliers to demonstrate. Those demonstrations are probably going to be about a half day. And you might say, oh my gosh, 4 suppliers, half day, that's, 2 full days. It's worth it. Remember, this is the top investment that you might make this year or maybe in the history of your organization. So it's essential that you give them the time to demonstrate. These demonstrations are to a structured agenda. It might be a free form demo with a few points that you really want to make sure that they hit, but you'll offer an agenda. And the reason that you want to offer an agenda is you don't want to create a circus-like environment. So this will keep them structured and also keep your team structured. Remember, whoever attends the demonstrations from your team must attend all of them because you're going to have an evaluation for the demonstrations, and you want to make sure that everybody is comparing products A, B, C, and D equally. So you can't have some people come in and out, or some people attend, the Salesforce but not the Razor's Edge demonstration. That wouldn't be fair. Remember, you need to value, again, that investment of the supplier's time. All right, 8, negotiations. So your panel has made a recommendation. Now we go into negotiations, and this is an interesting part. Remember that you can negotiate. So these suppliers are going to put forward a price point. And like buying a car or sometimes a house in certain markets, the list price is not always the best price. And so there are certain components that you can negotiate, and negotiate you must. Remember, you're still driving the bus. You haven't signed on the dotted line. So you can negotiate with the Salesforces, the Blackbauds, the Microsofts of the world, and on your licensing, and you can also negotiate with the implementation partners, and you should. Again, you're driving the bus. It is a very competitive environment. The space has gotten a lot more crowded, and thankfully it has, so you can negotiate. Ultimately, you're going to end up with a contract, and many of our customers have a pro bono law firm that will review that, and sometimes the nonprofit arm of Justice Connect will also review the contract for a charitable organization, and I encourage you to seek legal advice. Oftentimes things will be caught that weren't part of the agreement that will be in your favor, and so I encourage you to get legal review of those agreements. All right, number 9. So now we're going to ultimately make that selection and ultimately get married to this supplier. So we want to check their references. They will put forward 3 references way back at the proposal stage, and you're now going to contact those 3 references. But you're also going to contact referees that they didn't put on their list. And I think this is really important. Just like you might do in a hiring situation for a staff person, check organizations that they didn't put forward. Find out about their strengths, their weaknesses. We've got a whole list of sample questions that we oftentimes offer our customers to ask. It's important that you have 2 people on these reference check calls, because what one person doesn't hear, the other one will. One person might be taking the notes, the other person doing the asking. So you want to make sure that it's a free-flowing conversation and that you respect the reference time. You want to speak to former customers, including those that, left perhaps unhappy. You want to dig for information just to make sure that you're making the right choice. Remember that suppliers, just like a job applicant, put forward the people that are going to say the most glowing things about them, and that's fine. We all do that. At the end of the day, you want to check others just to see if there's something there that you need to build into the new relationship that you're about to go into. Select the best platform and the best supplier partner for your organization. Don't necessarily rely on the word of others, but this is an important component, just like it is in a hiring decision. Remember that you're going into a relationship, not a transaction. So many people out there view this as a transaction. I'm going to sign this, they're going to implement us, and then we're going to use the platform and be happily ever after. It doesn't work that way. You are going into a long-term relationship. There are some suppliers out there that really value that relationship and see it as a partnership. And in my mind, that's who we want to work with. Number 10, a business case. So your job's not done yet with this search process. So we want to develop a business case to go to the board, right? So we need to sell this decision to the finance committee, perhaps to the fundraising committee, and ultimately to the full board. So we've got to develop a business case. You want to write a really solid one. We have again, a template that we use, and that template is shaped obviously for the organization, but we know what must be in a business case. We know what's going to resonate with people who are of a business mind on the board, and therefore we cover certain things no matter what, and then we add in the stuff that is tailored towards specific organizations. A university is very different than a hospital or than a museum, and we want to make sure that we have addressed all of the things that are important to a given organization. Remember, your audience is the board and your executive leadership. Talk about the process that we've just gone through to get to this decision. Make sure they understand that it's been a very thorough process, that you haven't overlooked anything. No stone has gone, unturned here. You want to make sure that they understand the due diligence that you've done. Include the true cost of ownership. So remember that it's not just the licensing cost and the cost for the implementation, but ultimately it's the ongoing cost that you need to pay attention to, because the board will be investing for the project, but then they need to know what it's going to cost over the next 5 to 10 years to own this software. And you want to make sure that you project, increase in costs. I will tell you that just about every software company has increased their prices over the last 90 days. Once one of them did it, they all did it, and everybody's costs are increasing, and their costs have as well. All right, so just to summarize the 10-point process, remember there's this requirements gathering phase that's really important, where you document those requirements and look at your data. Remember, ultimately, you're going to introduce 2 documents that will go out to the market, and that's the RFP and the requirements document. Then you're going to start to involve suppliers through the invitations, the release of those documents, and supplier meetings, demonstrations, negotiations, and that contract. And then we get to the important implementation, which for some organizations can be 4 to 5 months. Others, it can be up to 2 years. It just depends upon the size and the complexity of an organization. But the implementation is the next important milestone. So when I talk about implementation, remember I said earlier, this is a whole webinar on its own, and perhaps Connecting Up will book in a webinar focused just on the implementation. But the first thing that I say is that you need to start with your data and start early. In fact, you could start looking at your data while you're searching. It's really important that you get your house in order in terms of the data. And I recommend a data inventory for that. So take an inventory of every single piece of data that you've got out there outside of your CRM. Make sure that your data is in such a condition that it can be easily migrated. A lot of these legacy systems allow for Mr. and Mrs. records. That's a no-no. Mr. is an individual, Mrs. is an individual, or whatever the gender and makeup of the household is, it doesn't matter. A household is made up of more than one person, one or more persons, And they are not joint. They might be in a relationship, but at the end of the day, they are separate individuals and they need to be separate records in your data set. How many deceased people do you have? How many bad addresses do you have? How many duplicates do you have? These are the kinds of things that you want to get your mind around in terms of the data. You want to make sure that there's a precise scope of work going into the project, and there's all sorts of project infrastructure that you can do even during the search process to get ready for that implementation. You want to ensure that you've got a project team, a steering committee, and other teams to ensure proper participation across the organization. Engage a project manager. Lots of organizations say, oh, we don't have anybody who would have the time to do that. Or they say, or we don't have anybody with that level of expertise, right? And that's a fair thing. Most charities don't hire a project manager to be on their staff full time. So there are plenty of us out there in the market that do this day in and day out. I'm at a project today in Melbourne in user acceptance testing for their CRM. And, you know, there are lots of us out there in the market that do this for a variety of organizations year in and year out. I've got about 12 projects going at this point in time, and that's what we do. We juggle multiple things at one time, but we've got systems down to get a project like this done. And again, I said there's lots of people out there in the market. All right, I'm going to sum up the takeaways, and then we're going to open it up to the chat window for questions. So I encourage you to put your questions in there, no matter the size of the organization or type of organization, no matter how silly you think your question might be. We invite them. We want to have a bit of a discussion with you. So in terms of takeaways, my first one is don't overbuy technology. I'm speaking to you through a MacBook Air right now. I probably use 30% of the functionality on this MacBook Air. I had to buy it as is. But the great thing is with Mac and a few of these other platforms, you can add stuff to it as you need it. And I encourage you to buy the technology set that you need to deliver on your functional requirements, but don't overbuy it. You can always add functionality down the road. Number two, acquire something that you can grow into. So remember when we were little kids and our parents used to buy us clothes that were a bit too big because they knew that we were growing. Your organization is growing. So I encourage you to buy something that is a bit of a stretch, remembering that you can add on to it and grow into the future. Third, ensure that your organization is ready for a project. Not every organization that thinks that they can take this on is actually ready for a project. Four, know what you're looking for and where to find it. And so that's about those functional requirements. Make sure that you define exactly what you need your CRM or your other technology set to deliver, and make sure you know how to find that. Number five, understand your requirements. So a lot of these are about those functional requirements, but that one definitely is. Next, make sure that the suppliers understand your requirements so they're written in language that they'll understand. Don't use internal jargon that they're never going to be able to figure out. Next, separate yourself from supplier influence. One way that charities tend to do that is to put somebody like us in the middle, right? And that defines boundaries and separates you from that influence. But if you think that there's any bias or any potential bias, just make sure that you draw the line, because you don't want anybody ever to come back to say to you that you ran an unfair process or a biased process. Remember that you're not buying buttonology. You're acquiring a relationship. And I'd like to hope that that relationship is for the long term. It won't be as intense as it is during the implementation, but wouldn't it be great if you end up finding a true partner in the market who wants to work with you on a support sort of ad hoc and future phase basis? And that's really what we're looking for here. Next, if you feel like you can't take a project like this on, hire a consultant out there to run the process for you. It might be the best spent dollars as part of this process because it helps you to run an objective, very fair process. And most of the suppliers like FundraisingForce out there in the market have these tools pre-built, and we do this all of the time, and we know the market, we know the nonprofit sector, and so it's easier for us to be able to dedicate our time to it, and you can do what you're meant to do in your day job. Last thing is, you'll notice that I titled this webinar, How to Find the Perfect CRM. There is no perfect CRM. What we really want you to do is find the best fit for your organization based on your requirements. And so what is perfect for one organization isn't necessarily perfect for another, but that's my line there, that there is no perfect CRM. All right, I'm gonna open up to questions. And as I do that, I'm gonna put my contact details up on the screen, and I encourage you to reach out, ask questions. Even if you think of them next week, send me a text message, an SMS or an email, ring me. I'm happy to answer your questions offline, but for now, I'm gonna turn it back and take any questions that are in the chat window.
Thank you, Stephen. Yes, we have a question here. Do many CRMs on the market integrate with cash book systems such as MyOb, Xero, Reckon, QuickBooks, etc.?
Yes, thank you for the question, and thank you for being first. That's brave of you. Absolutely. It used to be that many of these products that, some of which are on the screen and some of which have been sunset, didn't integrate with anything. Or if they did, they only integrated with their product. Well, the world has changed, and we expect our software systems to talk to each other. And so you'll find that many of these CRMs integrate with finance systems, student systems, patient systems, membership systems, you name it. And absolutely, the products that you mentioned, the CRMs that I've discussed today, some of them do integrate with those finance systems. Some of them integrate a lot better with those finance systems. So that's something that you want to look at as you study your requirements and study these products. But absolutely is the answer to the question, it can be done.
Another one here. I find it difficult knowing where to begin with suppliers that are in the industry. Is it best to do a survey of similar organizations to see who they use?
I actually would encourage you, obviously, to consider the process that I've laid out and not contact suppliers before you've gathered your requirements, because it's a bit going in, blind, and you don't know really what you're looking for. You think you understand your business, you think you know what's out in the market, but what if you're missing something? What if you go out there and you look at some products, you fall in love with one, but you haven't gathered your requirements, then you go to gather your requirements and you discover you need something else, well, then you got to go back out to the market. So I think there's a sequential order here. And I would encourage you not to go out to the market until you've gathered your requirements. I understand that some do that, and I also know that some of these suppliers are actively contacting, charities, doing cold calls to try to engage them. I get it. I run a business, and we all have to do that. However, I think there's a sequential order, and I would encourage you to just think about the process that I laid out today and whether or not that sequencing makes sense for most organizations.
All right. Are there any systems that incorporate both CRM and fundraising platforms?
Yes. I'll tell you that every product that I put up there, whether it's a fundraising solution or a CRM platform, every product would call themselves a CRM, which I think is a bit of a stretch. The products that I put up on the fundraising side really do fundraising really well. They don't do your fundraising, but they track your fundraising very well. And kudos to them for delivering that piece in a very strong fashion. The CRM side, not only track your constituents in a really rich way, but the three that I put up there also deliver on the fundraising side. It's become such a competitive market that the likes of Salesforce and Microsoft Dynamics, as an example, have had to develop, fundraising specific functionality. So it used to be that they rolled out just their sales functionality, and they said, here, live with our terminology in the corporate sector, live with our functionality, and that didn't quite cut it. So they've had to develop fundraising specific functionality in their CRM to speak our lingo, and to also deliver on what's a one-off gift, a regular gift, how do we track major gifts, trusts and foundations, corporates, the whole works, right? Bequests, you name it. And that functionality is becoming more and more mature. Salesforce's is coming up, probably close to a decade old, and Microsoft Dynamics has been out for several years in that nonprofit space. And because it's so competitive, they're learning from each other. 3 companies got together and created a common data model around the fundraising nonprofit sector. So they're all speaking the same lingo, even though they compete with one another, they're speaking in a common language. And all of this helps our sector. So the answer is yes, you can look at least those 2, if not Clarity, and they'll deliver on a CRM side and also on the fundraising side.
Okay, which CRM system would be best for a small organization just to manage donor database, communications, and receipting purposes?
Okay, that's the $1 million question. My answer is not going to be very settling to you, and that is I don't know. And the reason I don't know is I don't know all of your detailed requirements. So those functional requirements are really important. However, I'll say to you that you could be quite satisfied with products either in the fundraising space or on the CRM platform space. And I'll tell you why. Some of these CRM platforms will allow you to expand, grow as your organization changes and becomes more mature and takes more and more activities on. Therefore, you'd be satisfied because you can grow into it. Using the example, my mother bought me clothes that were too big as I was growing up because she knew that I was growing. On the other side, you could be quite satisfied with one of the fundraising platforms for a number of years, just going into it knowing that you might have to transition to something else should you outgrow that functionality, you outgrow those clothes, you've got to buy bigger clothes for the kids. So that's the best answer I can give with the limited information that I just heard about your organization. I hope that does help.
Okay, the process you outlined makes a lot of sense. We are a small or medium-sized charity. We do not have the time nor the expertise in-house. So how do you recommend we can conduct such a process?
Yes. So thank you for all these questions, by the way, and thank you for that question in particular. I recognize that there are some small to medium-sized charities represented on this call today, and it's an important question. I think that a couple of responses to you. One, there are suppliers out there in the market that do this type of service, myself and my competitors, and I would encourage you to consider engaging somebody who does have the time and the expertise to deliver the process with you. And I say with you, it's like a fundraising strategy. A supplier doesn't develop a strategy and hand it to you. It's a partnership, right? So you'll have to still participate in the engagement, but you're not actually coordinating the process. You're not driving the bus, you're a passenger. And I think that that's important. It will save you time, resources, energy, and it will be done in a structured way, whereas you've just recognized that you don't have that expertise. The other thing that I would say in answering your question is this process works for small, medium, and large size organizations. I've done this process for very small organizations, 2 staff people, 1 staff person, 3 staff people, you know, well under $1 million in revenue, 500,000 in revenue. So that type of space. And I've also done it for very large universities, international aid organizations, you name it, that would be raising 100, 110 million a year and have very large staffs as a result. It works for the full spectrum of organizations, no matter their size, but I do hear your pain. And I do think you need to find somebody with the expertise and the tools to actually drive the bus for you so that you get to the destination you must get to.
Excellent. What sort of exciting new technology do you see emerging in this sector?
Well, I would be remiss not to mention artificial intelligence, right? It's in the news every single day, sometimes multiple times a day, for better or for worse. And these technology platforms are building AI into them, and they have for the past several years, but it's becoming stronger. You know, that technology allows for the types of things to be done to remind you to do certain activities, to go and look for donors of a certain type within your CRM based on their behavior. And that type of technology is only going to grow. There's a demand for it. Most charities don't have staff that can spend the time finding the right prospects for the right type of gift at the right time. And so that technology is only going to grow, whether it's in you know, the most resourced CRMs such as Salesforce and Microsoft, or in these smaller products. It's going to grow over time because the demand is there.
Yeah, definitely, I agree. You did not talk about finance systems, marketing automation, third-party fundraising software. Is the process you recommend similar when searching for those types of systems?
Great question. Absolutely. You know, replace the word CRM with marketing automation or third-party fundraising or finance system or whatever it is, patient system, student record system. I don't know what it is, but this process can be tailored for any of those systems, and you can also do a multiple system search all at once. I've got customers that will want to look for a new CRM, marketing automation, and third-party platform at the same time. Not all of the suppliers do all of those things. So we will just do them simultaneously and tackle it all at once. And then ultimately the same supplier might implement all of it. And the same project manager will oversee the full project. For some organizations, that's too much change all at once. And so they'll take it in pieces, but you certainly can take these tools and this 10-step process and use it for any type of technology. It will work.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Has anyone got any other questions before I let Stephen go today? Just pop them into the questions box if anything comes up. I think you've answered pretty in detail there, Stephen. I think you've done your job well.
Well, thank you. I just want to say thank you to Connecting Up for hosting these types of webinars. They're such a service to our sector, and I also want to thank everybody for joining today and giving up this hour of your day.
Yep, perfect. As Stephen said, thank you very much to everyone for coming today. I will organise a recording to be sent out to everyone over the next few days, and that will include the last slide there with Stephen's contact details. Also in the body of the email, I'll send you Stephen's details as well, so you can contact him directly. Other than that, thank you all so much for coming, and thank you, Stephen, and hopefully we'll get chatting and do another webinar soon in the year.
Thank you. Have a good day, everybody.
You too. Bye-bye.